Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children Receiving an ICPC Referral webinar. This training will provide an overview of ICPC referrals when Wisconsin is the receiving state and your agency has been assigned to complete a home study and provide supervision. This training will not walk through the EWIS-ACWIS process for submitting a referral or working in an ICPC record. For that information, please visit the DCF Knowledge Web. To review, the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children, the ICPC, is a legally binding contract between states that regulates the placement of children across state lines to protect the best interests of the child. It's made up of 10 articles and 12 regulations that set the requirements for the ICPC. And it applies in most situations when a child is involved with the court or is under the jurisdiction of an agency. For more information, view the Understanding the ICPC webinar, which will provide an overview about what the ICPC is. First, let's briefly review the ICPC workflow when Wisconsin is the receiving state. It begins when there is a sending agency in another state that would like to place a child in Wisconsin. The agency submits the ICPC referral to the sending state ICPC office, which then sends the referral to the Wisconsin State ICPC office. In this situation, Wisconsin is the receiving state. The Wisconsin ICPC office will then assign a local agency, either a public adoption agency or a county, to complete the home study on the proposed placement resource. The local agency will then complete the home study and will then send the results to the Wisconsin ICPC office, which will send. So now that we've reviewed the overall process, let's go through each step of the process when Wisconsin is the receiving state. First, the Wisconsin ICPC office receives an ICPC referral from another state. Once we receive this referral, the ICPC specialist will review the request and ensure that all information required is included. Then they will take one of several actions. Number 1, deny. Although uncommon, in certain circumstances, the referral may be denied and will not be assigned to a Wisconsin agency. 2, they could return the referral to the sending state. They may return this referral if they need corrected or additional information. Or 3, to accept the referral. When a referral from another state is accepted, the ICPC specialist will complete a referral in EWIS-ACWIS and link the referral to an ICPC case that they create. The ICPC record is then created and will be assigned to a supervisor at the appropriate local agency. The Wisconsin ICPC office maintains a list of supervisors in each county or public adoption agency. If you have a preference on which supervisor should be on that list, just contact the ICPC office. The supervisor assigned must then assign a worker to complete the home study on the proposed resource according to the type of referral that was submitted. If the referral is a conversion for adoptions, please note that the public adoption agency will be assigned for the home study. And if your agency is already providing supervision for that child, you must coordinate transferring supervision requirements to the public adoption agency with that agency. But this should only occur if there's an accepted ICPC referral from the other state for the purposes of adoption. After being assigned, the next step is for your agency to review the referral. Again, ICPC referrals are processed in EWIS-ACWIS and are linked to the ICPC record. So you will find all of your documentation in the referral associated with the child's ICPC record. All documentation that you need to review will be in the documentation tab of the referral. So please review all information and all of the documentation carefully prior to starting the home study. If you have reviewed the entire referral and you still have questions, please contact the assigned ICPC specialist. You may be assigned to complete a home study based on 3 different regulations. Based on the type of regulation, you'll have different required timeframes for completion and different requirements for the home study. Let's take a quick review of these regulations. Regulation 1 is the relocation of the family unit. This means that the child is currently placed with an approved resource in the other state, and that child is moving to Wisconsin with the approved resource. Supervision of the child and of the child's placement will continue in Wisconsin. Regulation 2 are public court jurisdiction cases. It might be for a parent, a relative, a foster care placement, or pre-adoptive placements, and it may also be a conversion request. The request might be for licensed placements or unlicensed placements. And then finally, you may receive a referral for a Regulation 7 case, which is our expedited placement decisions. Please remember that these only apply in specific circumstances, and it requires a specific court order prior to the other state making the referral. Once you know which regulation type and home study type you are assigned by reviewing the referral, you will begin step 4, which is to complete the home study and provide recommendation to approve or deny to the Wisconsin ICPC office. When completing the home study, the local agency must follow all local and state regulations in order to complete that home study. And please note that you may decide to make a home study report to update the sending state on the progress of the home study, but it is not required to make a placement decision with that report. And finally, please note that the local agency makes a placement recommendation based on the home study, and not the final approval, whether or not the placement can be approved or denied. So let's review a couple of different types of home studies. First is the parent or relative home study. If the request is for a parent home study or an unlicensed relative home study, these types of home studies are required to be documented on the ICPC parent-relative home study, which is generated in eWisAquis. As a part of this home study, the agency caseworker will at a minimum document the following. You'll describe the home and the neighborhood and the sleeping room arrangements in the home. You'll list all household members, and then most importantly, you'll assess the social history, discipline techniques, health, financial abilities, education, strengths and weaknesses of the proposed resource, and how that will affect the care of the child once placed in the home. Background checks must also be conducted on the proposed resource, and any findings factored into the decision to approve or deny the home study. A list of the required background checks can be found in ongoing services standards. But please note that the sending state may request additional background checks to be completed, and the agency completing the home study may conduct the additional background checks other than what's listed in ongoing standards. If the is for a licensed relative, foster care, or pre-adoptive home study, your agency must proceed with licensure. All licensing requirements under Chapter DCF 56 Administrative Code apply for foster home licensure, including the requirement to use the Safe Home Study tool and all background check requirements. If the proposed resource is already licensed in Wisconsin as a foster home, the assigned Wisconsin agency must complete a home study update by studying the family for the individual child to be placed. If the resource is licensed by a private agency, please note that the sending agency in the other state may enter a contract with the Wisconsin agency to complete the home study and all supervision requirements for the ICPC placement. But ultimately, the assigned Wisconsin agency is responsible for maintaining the placement resource's foster home license and ensuring that the resource meets and follows all applicable laws, codes, and policies for licensure in Wisconsin. Please note that only entities authorized to approve a home for adoption have the regulatory approval to complete an adoptive home study for a family. So if a sending state requests that Wisconsin study and approve a home for adoption of a child, the appropriate public adoption agency will be assigned to conduct the study. All Wisconsin requirements to adopt must be met prior to the finalization of adoption in Wisconsin. If the resource was approved for ICPC placement by a county child welfare agency prior to the request for the adoption home study, the adoption agency will work with the county agency that approved the resource to transition the case from the county to the adoption agency. Now that we've gone through a couple of different home study types, there's a few different timeframes you should be aware of when thinking about an ICPC request that you have been assigned to. The first is the requirement for the sending state ICPC office to send the completed request to the Wisconsin ICPC office. Secondly, if applicable, the requirement for the local agency in Wisconsin to give provisional approval or denial to the placement resource. This provisional approval is not always required, and if the sending state were to place in Wisconsin under a provisional approval, if the final decision is denied, the child must return to the receiving or to the sending state. If applicable, the requirement for the local agency to give a home study report. Remember that these reports are how the home study is progressing and do not have to include a recommendation on placement. And finally, the time frame for the Wisconsin ICPC office to issue a final decision to the sending state ICPC office. Let's review these timeframes for each regulation type. Regulation 1s are relocation of the family unit. First, the sending state ICPC office has 5 business days to send it to the Wisconsin ICPC office upon receipt. And then once assigned, the local agency here in Wisconsin must respond with a provisional approval or denial within 5 business days of the request by our ICPC office. Then, within 60 calendar days of the receipt of the completed request, the local agency must provide a home study report. And then, within 180 calendar days of the receipt of the initial request, the Wisconsin ICPC office must issue a final decision to the sending state ICPC office. Our Regulation 2 requests. There is no specified time frame in regulations for the sending state to send a request to Wisconsin. And there is no requirement for the local agency to provide provisional approval or denial. But within 60 days of the receipt of a completed request from the Wisconsin office, the local agency must provide a home study report. And then finally, within 180 calendar days of the receipt of the request, the Wisconsin ICPC office must issue a final decision to the sending state. Finally, with our Regulation 7 requests, our expedited requests, within 2 business days of the receipt of the complete referral from the sending agency, the sending state ICPC office must send the request to Wisconsin. And then if the sending state requested, the local agency must provide provisional approval or denial within 7 calendar days of the request. There is no requirement to provide a home study report, and this is because the final decision is due within 20 business days of the receipt of the request from the sending state ICPC office, which means that the local agency must provide their recommendation for placement within 15 business days of the receipt of the request from Wisconsin's ICPC office. So now that we've discussed the different home studies and relevant timeframes, let's move on to step 5. The local agency submits the home study and makes a placement recommendation. Once an agency has completed the home study, the agency will complete work in the ICPC record in eWisAquis. Please remember the eWisAquis Knowledge Web has resources that will walk you through the ICPC record and the required steps. In the ICPC record, there is a tab to upload or complete the home study, make a placement recommendation, and upload necessary supporting documents for the ICPC specialist to review with the home study. Please note that background checks completed on the proposed resource should only be uploaded into the specific background check images associated with the person or provider, and not in the ICPC record. Step 6. The Wisconsin ICPC office approves or denies the request. Once a home study is uploaded into eWisAquis, the Wisconsin ICPC office will review the local agency's home study and the placement recommendation, and ensure that all applicable laws and regulations are met and that the placement is not contrary to the best interests of the child. After reviewing, the Wisconsin ICPC specialist will make a decision to approve or deny the placement and send the decision on a signed 100A to the sending state ICPC office. Please note that while it does not happen often, the Wisconsin ICPC specialist may make a decision that is different than the recommendation that the local agency has made for placement in Wisconsin. Also, please note that if the placement is denied by the Wisconsin ICPC specialist, placement may not be made in Wisconsin. And if for whatever reason the child was already placed in Wisconsin and a denial is issued, the child must be returned to the sending state. Once the sending state ICPC office receives the 100A, that ICPC office will notify the sending agency of Wisconsin's decision. If the Wisconsin ICPC office approves the referral for a child to be placed in Wisconsin, the sending agency then decides whether or not to place the child here. Again, they have the final decision, but the approval of the placement from Wisconsin is valid for 6 months from the date the 100A that approved the placement was signed. After 6 months, a new referral would need to be requested and a new home study would need to be completed by the Wisconsin local agency. If the sending agency decides to place the child in Wisconsin, they must submit a 100B to the Wisconsin ICPC office within 3 business days of the placement of the child. This notifies the Wisconsin ICPC specialist of the placement so that they may contact you and initiate supervision of the child in Wisconsin. Please remember that if you find out that a child has been placed in Wisconsin illegally without the protections of the ICPC, please contact the ICPC office and discuss the situation with an ICPC specialist. Step 8 is the local agency is notified of the placement of a child and is assigned for supervision. So when placement is made in Wisconsin, the ICPC specialist will upload the 100B received from the sending state into eWisAquis. The ICPC record will then be assigned to a supervisor at the appropriate local agency. Just like with home studies, the Wisconsin ICPC office maintains a list of supervisors in each county or public adoption agency. This may be the same supervisor that was assigned earlier for the purposes of completing the home study, or it may be a supervisor from a different unit at the local agency. If your agency has a change in supervisor who would be assigned, please contact one of the ICPC specialists and notify them of the supervisor that should be assigned. Then the supervisor must assign a worker to complete the supervision on the placement. And again, as a reminder, if the referral is for a conversion to adoptions, the current supervising agency and the public adoption agency will work together on transferring supervision requirements to the public adoption agency. But this should only occur if there's an accepted ICPC referral from the other state for the purposes of adoption. So once the child is placed, the local agency supervises the placement. The sending agency in the other state will maintain jurisdiction of the child and continue with all of their state requirements for case practice. Supervision shall begin no later than 30 days from the date on which the child is placed, or 30 days from the date on which the receiving state is notified of the child's placement, if that notification happened after the placement occurred. ICPC regulations require that supervision must include face-to-face contacts with the child at least once each month, and that a majority of the visits occur in the child's home. When a child is placed from out of state into Wisconsin, the assigned Wisconsin agency must follow all caseworker contact requirements set forth in ongoing services standards, as well as the contact requirements in DCF Chapter 56 Administrative Code for licensed foster parents. And finally, the quarterly supervision reports are required to be submitted through the ICPC record in eWisAquis on the required form. So finally, Step 10 is that the sending agency would close the placement. So the sending agency's responsibility for the child continues until the placement is legally terminated due to one of the following: the child returning to their home state, being legally adopted, having guardianship transferred to the placement resource, reaching the age of majority, or discharging for whatever reason with the concurrence of Wisconsin. With that being said, if the child's placement disrupts and the Wisconsin local agency wants to send the child back to the sending state must bring the child back within 5 business days of the request from Wisconsin or within a time frame that all parties agree on. The sending agency is responsible for paying for and arranging the transportation of the child back to the sending state. But please note that if there are any child abuse or neglect concerns, Wisconsin may place the child into another home until the child is able to return to the sending state. If you have a situation in which you know a placement is disrupting and a child needs to be returned to the sending state, please contact your ICPC specialist assigned to the case. And please note that the sending agency then must submit a 100B to close the placement to the Wisconsin ICPC office within 3 business days of the placement ending. Once the sending state sends this 100B to the ICPC office, the ICPC specialist will close the ICPC record in Iwasakwas, and then they are able to close the ICPC case in Iwasakwas. There's a lot more information available if you need additional ICPC resources, and you can find more information by going onto the DCF website where there is an ICPC page with additional information. This includes additional webinars, so the Understanding ICPC, as well as the Submitting an ICPC Referral. It also has a link to the Ongoing Services Standards, which has an ICPC policy with a lot of detail in there. It also has a link to the Iwasakwas Knowledge Web, which has ICPC user guides, as well as webinars and walkthroughs. There's also ICPC contact information on the website, where you can reach the ICPC specialist or the ICPC assistant. And finally, a link to the ICPC state pages, which has information about each state's ICPC requirements. And finally, there is an ICPC desk guide that will provide an overview of the ICPC process. You can contact your DCF Child Welfare Regional Coordinator for a copy of this desk guide. Hopefully this webinar was helpful for you, and I thank you for joining me.